The problem of smuggling, the CBN now, which is an aberration. CBN is not a trade policy making body. CBN is monetary policy. So everything is in a state of confusion at the moment. CBN has made more trade policy interventions, probably, than the Ministry of Trade or the Ministry of Finance, which are the two key trade policy institutions.
All right, so we'll begin our program today taking our quote from Adam Smith, who was an 18th century Scottish philosopher. He is considered the father of modern economics. He once said, "Every man lives by exchanging." I quite agree with this one. All right, we'll take our second one, and this one is from Nancy Randolph Pearcey, an American evangelical author on the Christian world view. She once said, "Competition is always a good thing. It forces us to do our best. A monopoly renders people complacent and satisfied with mediocrity." Absolutely spot on. Now we'll take our last one, and this one is from Edward Charles de Bono, Maltese physician, psychologist, author, inventor, philosopher and consultant. He originated the term lateral thinking. He once said, "Companies that solely focus on competition will die. Those that focus on value creation will thrive." Very interesting quote, you say. Now let's see how all of this relates to what we will be discussing today. Very warm greetings and welcome to D Conversation. We're reaching you from Kaftan's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Annabelle Oji. Now, the Nigerian business climate is no doubt fraught with many challenges, ranging from an inadequate supply of foreign exchange, inadequate supply of electricity, poor access to long-term funds, multiple taxation, shortage in forex supply, and parallel rate hikes, investment drags due to uncertainties, inconsistent government policies, snowballing impact of insecurity and insurgency, amongst others. Now, these challenges have so far affected the country's trade pattern, investment climate, as well as investors' appetite for investment. Now, on the show today, we will be having a chat with Barrister Leonard Ugbajah, who is the Executive Director, Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy, CTBA, right there in his Abuja office. You don't want to miss this. Please join us again. If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We are reaching you from Kaftan's television here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Now we have our guest. He is Barrister Leonard Ugbajah, and we will be talking to him here in his office. Great to have you, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad to be talking with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right, now let's start by getting your opening remarks on trade policy in Nigeria. Now, I know that you're an expert in that sector, and then you have discussed a lot about trade policy on different platforms. So let's get your thought on trade policy and then trade policy documents in Nigeria and the conversations around that.
Okay, trade policy in Nigeria is an interesting topic because it's a field that has been marked by a lot of inconsistency. First, let's even understand what's even trade policy.
Okay.
In the first place, when you look at trade policy, you're looking at a country's policy or strategy, or like I can call it measures a country adopts in its trade with other countries and to an extent trade within the country. So Nigeria's trade policy basically should be a collection of policy statements, measures, instruments, which may include laws actually, that underpin Nigeria's trade with other countries of the world and how Nigeria regulates trade domestically. And when you talk about trade with other countries of the world, Nigeria has, you could divide it into three categories. So within our immediate geopolitical setting, we have the ECOWAS region, and we have a preferential trade regime within ECOWAS, that which involves only ECOWAS member states, 15 member states of ECOWAS. That's under the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, and a whole lot of accompanying instruments, including the protocol on the common external tariff. You have other instruments regarding to the free movement of persons, establishment, and all that. Now that's within ECOWAS. The second layer has become more prominent recently, and that is the continental within Africa. It's become more prominent with the conclusion of the African Free Trade, African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which is supposed to be in force already. So with that, AfCFTA seems to be the buzzword. Most people don't even talk about the ECOWAS trade any longer. We're talking about continental trade integration. So Nigeria has obligations at the continental level. Now, the third layer of that is at the global level, and that's the multilateral trade trading system under the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Nigeria is a member of the WTO, and by virtue of that, there are certain obligations, certain requirements that Nigeria needs to meet in its domestic trade policy. So it's basically saying that your external trade engagements, whether at the regional level ECOWAS, at the continental level AfCFTA, or at the international multilateral level WTO, inform those engagements or those obligations, inform your domestic trade policy, because your domestic trade policy is not supposed to be in conflict with your external obligations. It's supposed to reflect your external obligations, not in conflict with them. That's how it's supposed to be. So, and of course, you have other bilateral trade agreements between Nigeria and maybe UK, between Nigeria and, we don't have a proper bilateral trade agreement with the UK. Or that kind of cooperation agreements, economic cooperation agreements with other countries. Now, within that context, you now come home. What you're supposed to do is to formulate a policy, preferably contained in a single document. That will define how you intend to trade with other countries based on those obligations you've entered into, how you intend to maximize the benefit of trading with other countries. So that should ordinarily start from productivity. So whether it is productivity in industry, agriculture, in services, which will include professional services, education services, it's a whole lot. So now it's how you move the competitiveness, how you improve competitiveness in the local economy, and then translate the competitiveness to export trade. So these are the things that form your trade policy. Now, in Nigeria, the current trade policy we have in Nigeria was formulated in 2002. A child born in 2002 is a teenager now. Now, and I'm not saying that we don't even realize that it's moribund. Everybody realizes that it's moribund. But what has happened? Why haven't we changed it? I'll tell you. So an attempt was made, I think, between 2015 to 2000 and I can't remember. I remember the dates now. To formulate another trade policy, it was in the immediate past administration. I think it was 2010 and 2015 to formulate a new trade policy for Nigeria. Now, that process involved a lot of expenditure, so from both the government, but more importantly, it was funded predominantly by the UK government through what they call the DFID then, which is now the FCDU. And that process resulted into a draft trade policy document and into a draft trade policy strategy document. So basically, a document that defined the strategy for actualizing the policy. And that policy, those two documents were never adopted. So they remained a draft until, and it was supposed to run up until, it was supposed to be 2015 to 2017 or so, up until when it was supposed to expire. It has expired as a draft. It was never adopted. Now, from 2015 up to 2022 that we're in, why hasn't this government adopted a trade policy? I don't know. So there's been some effort here, there and all that, but somehow I think it hasn't been seen as a priority by the government, because it's it's somewhat how do I describe it? It's amazing in in a negative sense, not in a positive sense, that we could be doing our external trade, especially negotiated the entire AFCFTA and signed and now ratified the AFCFTA. We don't have a domestic trade policy document that defines our trade policy objectives and how to actualize them. So that's where we are now. So I think I see that's one of the big failures of this government, and particularly of the Minister for Trade, that up until this moment under his watch, Nigeria has not been able to come up with a trade policy document.
All right, so in just a few seconds, you said quite a lot of things that, if I have like loads of questions running through my mind already. All right, so now let's get your thought. What can actually be done to buffer or rejig our trade policy or incentives so as to attract more investment or investors?
Okay, so we've established that Nigeria really doesn't have a what you call a trade policy at the moment. Because what we have, I don't think anybody still makes reference to it. The 2002 document. Now, let me also say something before I get to this point. That now it doesn't mean that Nigeria doesn't have a trade policy, so to say. Trade policy, it could be a single document, but it could also be, like I said earlier, a collection of policy measures. That a country applies. So, for example, when Nigeria imposed an import ban or shut the borders, that's a trade policy measure. Or when the CBN imposes restrictions on import of certain raw materials or certain finished products, that's a trade policy measure. So what you see we're doing now, we're using ad hoc policy measures, to drive trade policy instead of having a well-coordinated, a well-planned document that defines our policy measure. So we do ad hoc, just act sometimes on the spur of the moment without any evidence, without any proper articulation of the objectives.
Like a one-fixed solution.
Oh yes. So if tomorrow there is maybe problem of smuggling, the CBN now, which is an aberration. CBN is not a trade policy making body. CBN is monetary policy. So everything is in a state of confusion at the moment. CBN has made more trade policy interventions probably than the Ministry of Trade or the Ministry of Finance, which are the two key trade policy institutions, in that respect. So what are we doing at the moment? There are a lot of things we're doing to improve local competitiveness, to attract more investment, but the challenge, like I said, is the challenge of proper articulation and consistency in planning and implementation. So, for example, one of the things you can always make reference to is the ease of doing business agenda, which has run since 2016 up until this moment under the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council. Now, the idea, if you put it in a complete trade policy context, it will be to, like I said earlier, to improve local competitiveness, which then translates to export competitiveness. So by the time you address binding constraints to businesses, especially MSMEs in Nigeria, so we're talking about administration of property rights, payment of taxes, you're talking about the judicial system, the process for resolving commercial disputes, you're talking about insolvency, you're talking about all those registering of company, winding down, and all those, when you make processes, which includes processes of obtaining whether any kind of licenses, business permits, basically the everyday processes, regulatory processes that the businesses go through. Now, when you make it easy and seamless, you make it easier for businesses to start and thrive within that economy. That's the problem we have in Nigeria. An average MSME faces multiple hurdles in doing their business. So I'll give you an example in a place like Abuja now, where we are. All manner of revenue agents coming to knock at your shop. So this one I'm saying, we're AMAC this, we are FCD that.
Yeah, LICO, tax force.
Yeah, tax force this, and all that. Now, it shouldn't be. That's a barbaric way of regulation in modern era. Ordinarily, yes, there should be a portal where a new business goes to in the FCT. And if I'm starting a new business, I'll go there. You see all the regulations and guidelines that apply to your line of business. You see all the fees or licenses you need to obtain. And by a click, you should be able to pay, complete the forms, obtain your licenses. Now, if they need to do inspection to issue certain licenses, for example, fumigation license, they need to see, then they can arrange with you, come for inspection and issue the licenses. But now, with the use of revenue collectors and people whose motives are predominantly profit, use them to collect revenue, you're killing businesses.
So, sorry to cut you in. Are you among the school of thought that believes that all of that is just giving more job to the boys?
Yes, like I said, you use revenue agents. Their motive is profit. So the guy who employs the revenue agent, the company who is that is employed, usually will come through a political connection. So it's giving work to the boys. So, and the person himself will probably recruit some of the other boys who have worked in elections and all that. So you see them all over the place. Their motive is not really law enforcement. Their motive is, because they know the money they get from you, they take a percentage of it. So they need to extract as much as possible from you. So it's barbaric. In fact, it's more alarming when you consider the fact that the law, I'm trying to remember the law, the Taxes and Collections Consolidated Act, I can't remember the particular title of that act, makes it an offense, for any tier of government to use revenue agents or to block the roads and all that to collect taxes. It's illegal in Nigeria, but it's happening everywhere.
All right, since you mentioned the World Trade Organization, a lot of people, like you said before, that our trade policy is moribund. So you have a lot of people saying that our trade policies are obsolete. So that the appointment of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is going to be like that magic wand that will help turn things around 360 without a flinch. But then on the flip side, people keep asking that how much have we even prepared ourselves to leverage on the humongous benefits that the World Trade Organization has to offer, and even her appointment. So after 13 months of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's appointment as the DG of WTO, are we there yet? How far so far?
Well, I think I'm going to say this probably for the umpteenth time, that Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's appointment at WTO doesn't have any magic wand to your trade policy. It doesn't add anything to your trade policy.
Okay.
I made this clear to a few journalists and others that spoke to me within that period. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's appointment to the WTO, she was a Nigerian candidate, was purely on the personal merit. And the position of the DG of the WTO, you're serving as an international public servant, not representing any country. Okay. You cannot funnel certain advantages to your country of origin. They will sack you. That would be against the rules. That would be unethical, So like I said at that time, the only kind of change I expected from her appointment, was that because Nigeria's trade policy measures, whether import prohibition, whether the 41, 42, and I think it's now 43 items not eligible for foreign exchange, that's the CBN list, they've been subject to not strict legal challenge, but they've been subject to concerns. Certain countries have expressed concerns about those policies because it affects their own trade with Nigeria negatively.
Okay.
And when a country expresses concern about your trade policy measures, as a trading partner, it's a step to go into dispute resolution, what you call the WTO court. So that concern, you could escalate the request for consultation. From consultation, they could file a formal suit challenging your trade policy measures. So that's taking you to dispute settlement. Now, I expected that Nigeria would be more circumspect in the kind of measures Nigeria uses in its trade policy, because you say, well, since it's our person there, let's not disgrace her, So we want to make sure that since it's our person there, we want to make sure that we become more thoughtful or more try to play more by the rules.
Okay.
But we haven't really done that, unfortunately. Unfortunately, so that inspiration is not working for us. Having there is not working for us. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is this. People say WTO imposes obligations on developing countries. It's in favor of developed countries. Since we joined WTO, our industries have shut down. This thing, yeah. But these are half truths. This is a single story. Because the complete story is this: that the WTO has imbalances, and nobody can argue with that. When it comes to bigger, the richer countries having their way in most of the cases. So there are imbalances in the WTO, and there are ways within the WTO for you to challenge those imbalances. In terms of WTO reforms, which are ongoing now. But the bigger problem for us in Nigeria, and I like bringing it back to Nigeria. The bigger problem for us is that we have not managed to get our acts together. Yes. In fact, I wrote my my MA thesis, on power politics in the WTO. How countries play the politics of the WTO. Now, where we have failed, two places. Number one, you have to first of all get your domestic policy, domestic competitiveness right. Okay. So that means you're producing, you're trading, and you're a major trading partner. So being a major trading partner means you have a substantial share of world trade. So other countries respect you because, for example, maybe you're a prime supplier of computer chips, or you're a prime supplier of, maybe processed shit, the kind of things we produce here, So you have a very high share of global trade. I don't think Nigeria has up to 0.5% share of global trade, Now, so when you have that, you already insert yourself in that system. So, for example, Brazil is a developing country like Nigeria. India is, but they've inserted themselves. South Africa is, but they've inserted themselves more into that trading system that we have, because because they are more strongly linked into the global value chain in terms of production, export, import. Now we don't have that. Now our productivity and export is predominantly crude oil, which is not a subject in the WTO. Now, so if you have that right, so that means you show yourself, well, I'm also a big player here. That's the first thing. Now, the second thing is that economic power, then translates to political power at the WTO. So that means you're able to negotiate more from an equal footing with the other countries. So, for example, a country like WTO, like India, has consistently held its ground when it comes to the negotiations in the WTO. Whether relating to stockpiling of food, for food security reasons, they got a concession on that, and so you can get concessions, when you are a major player and you know how to play the politics that one. Then the other part of it is this: the available flexibilities within the WTO body of agreements, also allows countries to pursue their own domestic trade policy objectives. So, for example, you can do import prohibition legally under the WTO if you do it under the right article. So, for example, you can use exceptions under Article 21, or even use security exceptions under Article 20, So, but the problem is that you can use balance of payment. There are different exceptions you could use to do what you call protectionist policies, legally. Now, but the challenge here is that Nigeria has used these policy measures that are against WTO without using the exceptions available to WTO. Just like if I tell you that, well, we are here, nobody gets out of this place, but if you must get out, this is the door, you must use the door, and then before you use the door, that you should show me why you should get out, and I will show you the door. But you just get up and say, man, I'm tired of this place. You break the window and you jump out. So you have the flexibilities you could use, but you don't use them. And then you just, so I don't know. It's a combination of a lot of problems, including the fact that the capacity for trade policy making and implementation, the expertise is very low here. It's very low in Nigeria. That's a fact.
All right. Still on that, during her appointment, she had one of the press conferences that she held. She talked about governance reforms, that we need to get in on our governance reforms. We need to rebuild trust between the least developed economies, the developing economies like Nigeria and Brazil, like you also talked about, and then also the developed economies. And then she also talked about equality of membership. How far has it been all through?
Okay, so like I said earlier, so there's a perception, and it's beyond perception. I must be very frank with you. The reality of the real politic, in the WTO is that it works more, it serves more the interest of the developed world.
Okay.
Because they were the major forces, in the founding of the global multilateral trading system, and they made sure that the rules served their purpose, and that's how the rules have remained. Now, what this has cost over the years is that the developing countries see it as their thing, so it's like us versus them.
Against them.
So yeah, that's what she talked about in terms of trust. Because if you ask us to take certain obligations that we feel are not in our economic interest, the issue of subsidy, agricultural subsidy, is used widely by the developed world. The US, UK, EU, those two, they put so much into subsidizing agriculture, and the agri products they subsidize find their way to the international market. They come here. So for example, I use cotton, for example. If you subsidize cotton in the US, and the farmer who produces cotton, say, in Burkina Faso, Togo, Mali, those are the major cotton producing countries in Africa, or even in Nigeria as well, trying to produce cotton. How do you expect that farmer to compete with a cotton that has received substantial subsidy coming from the US? That's a problem, But the laws don't prohibit the use of subsidies. I'm speaking generally now, it's more technical than that. Now, the laws will allow the US and the EU to use those subsidies, whether for producing dairy products, for producing, food products of all kinds, maybe vegetables, fruits, and other. But that same WTO law will not allow you, for example, as Nigeria, to use that subsidy, beyond a particular threshold. It's more technical than that. So it's imbalance. So there's distrust. For example, the COVID vaccines. Now, the intellectual property regime under the WTO, we call it TRIPS. Now there's a carve-out, that allows countries to use to basically discard patents when they want to address a public health emergency. So, for example, if you need to produce drug to address a public health emergency, you can use compulsory licensing, to permit your domestic manufacturers to produce that drug, not minding the fact that the owner of the patent hasn't given it to you. That's one. You can also negotiate with the owner of the patent to do it. Now, we saw with the COVID vaccines that the Western countries that had the vaccines were not willing to even negotiate to offer the patent to developing countries to produce for themselves. And then, of course, the issue of compulsory licensing, nobody even dared it. So, we started talking about, how do we use some kind of mechanism called a waiver, a TRIPS waiver, to allow countries, developing countries that have the capacity to manufacture the drugs, to manufacture the vaccines. Now, that discussion has lingered up to today. And who is still looking for COVID vaccine now? Most people are no longer looking for it because COVID, almost people are forgetting about it. So, you look at it, when we were dying, I remember doing an academic article for a conference, I presented at that moment. And my thesis in that article was to say that you're holding the vaccine and holding other life-saving medical devices or consumables that the developing world needs, at the moment when they need it the most, goes against the spirit of solidarity that should underpin the international system. So what it simply means is that you're telling me that I cannot trust in this system, so it's to your tent, O Israel. So I should go to do what I like, because if I say, we all have a common set of rules, then when the chips are down, you know how to protect yourself and you leave me in the cold. That was basically what happened to developing countries, in the COVID outbreak.
All right, it's actually good that you made this clear, because a lot of people will keep asking that, okay, why are we not even producing our own vaccines? And then they don't know there are some laws or some politics
that's
around.
not all the reason. That's not all the reason why we're not producing. The primary reason why we are not producing our vaccines is because we didn't develop any vaccines. That's the primary reason. Okay. So this one I talked about is another reason.
Okay.
I'm in international relations, they were talking about realist and idealist, and I'm a realist, and I'm a realist, and I believe what people should do what they need to do. For example, if we had developed a COVID vaccine at the peak of the COVID outbreak, nobody will stop us from producing it. But now, because we are looking to produce their own, it's okay. Please, you people should just share this knowledge with us so that
we just keep being handouts or something. Yes.
So if you depend on others, you find yourself in that kind of situation. But that doesn't reshape the argument that the international system, is built on solidarity. Supposedly so.
Okay.
But when the chips are down, you realize that you're your own.
All right. I mean, you actually talked about something where you give an example of if you was asked to leave this room using the door, some people might decide to leave using the window. Now you see that there are supposed to be policies or processes rather establishing any policy, but then in Nigeria you just have someone who brings up one policy and then the next day they just scrap that policy or abolish it arbitrarily, and maybe bring up something else like a makeshift, and then without thinking of the spiral effect. So how much does it even affect anything? Businesses?
Yeah. When I started, I said that the trade policy environment in Nigeria is marked by inconsistency. And for most businesses, whether those already in Nigeria, those who are looking to expanding into Nigeria, they will tell you that their major challenge with Nigerian business environment is unpredictability. It's unpredictability. I mean, you can model risk in business. So if the risk of operating in Nigeria is security risk, if it is, you avoid where the security challenge is. Okay. If it is foreign exchange risk, you can build that into your financial model. What of when it is uncertainty? How do you model uncertainty? Uncertainty is unknown. But when you have an environment that throws up uncertainties at you, then that's a no-no for businesses.
Okay.
It's a no-no for businesses. So we find a lot of that. Inconsistencies at different levels. So for example, you have 1, 2, 3 government agencies doing the same thing. They adopt different approaches, or because their law overlaps somehow. So this person says this, another person comes with a similar policy. That's even good. But sometimes they actually come with divergent policies. That's on one level. On another level, we start something today, we don't follow it through. We don't follow it through. So, for example, where is the NIRP, the National Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan that was done by, I think that was by Aganga or that Jonathan. It's there. The Ministry of Trade will tell you they are implementing it, but that policy expired in 2019. There was supposed to be a 5-year plan. Expired in 2019. There's no successor, and there's no putting it out there that this is what we're implementing or that we'll reform it or something. And I can name for you a multitude of policies that it was a Commerce 44 that was I think in the time of Bello as the minister. So almost everybody keeps coming up with new things. Nobody thinks about continuity, about consistency. We don't. Or is it the tough fighting between the CBN and the customs? So CBN gives you a policy for import as a business person, and you get to the port and custom tells you, well, you are not aware of that, but you have built your business plan based on that, and custom tells you. They are still fighting about this. What's this new one they introduced now between CBN and between the customs, or between CBN and the Ministry of Finance, or between
Bureau de Change.
Yeah, so it's a whole lot of inconsistency, and it's not good for business. Business thrives on predictability. If you're going to charge me 100 naira, if the cost of compliance with the regulation is 100 naira, if it take me 3 days, and it will take me 10 processes to comply with a particular obligation. I know it. I factor that into my business model.
Okay.
Now, but when I come down, to the place of compliance, I realized that it was said to be 100 naira, but in fact, it's actually 500. It's supposed to take 3 days, but it's taking me 30 days. It is supposed to take me 10 processes, but it's taking me 100 processes. It doesn't work. And that's what the whole ease of doing business agenda has tried to solve with some marginal success.
All right, then let's go on a quick break, and when we return, we will continue with this conversation. Don't move a muscle. They keep asking, do we still have that commission, FCC there?
FCCPC, yeah.
Do we still have them? Are they even still doing anything at all?
Okay, interestingly, so the consumer protection environment or scene in Nigeria has been pathetic, and it's not limited to Nigeria. I think it's a global problem. It's a global problem because there is asymmetry of power between the manufacturer and the consumer.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We're reaching you from Captain's Television here in the nation's capital, Abuja. If you just joined us, you've missed quite a lot because we've been chatting with Barrister Leonard Ugbajah, and we've been talking about quite a lot of things. Now, before we went on that break, we said quite a lot of things. Now, let's talk about, there's a report, a recent report of 39% increase in investment proposal for Nigeria, with Lagos topping the chart across the country, even with the AFCT. And then you have they actually have a value of $8.7 billion US, and then you have followed by Bayelsa and then Delta. So now, what can actually be done to make it a subnational spread? Because you have some states, like for example Kaduna, that has some things they do with the KADIPA, the Kaduna Investment
Development Promotion Agency.
Exactly. So they're trying to do a lot to gain more investment, but then it looks like something is hampering their efforts. What exactly can be done to make it a subnational spread?
Well, in the case of Kaduna, I'm sure you're aware that they came up with a statement to show that they also had that the figures don't represent what is on ground for them. They came up with a statement and showed their facts. And I must say upfront that Kaduna is one of the states that have consistently attracted the most investment in Nigeria in the past few years.
Okay.
Yes, and that's for a good reason. Unfortunately, the security situation in Kaduna is not good, but they've really done a lot in terms of investment promotion, and creating the enabling environment for businesses. So we're looking at about the Olam, the Tomato Juice, there are a whole lot of new businesses, or the Peugeot, Dangote Peugeot and all that has gone into Kaduna recently. Lagos is obvious. If Lagos was a country, it would be, I think, about the 6th largest economy in Africa.
Okay.
So that means the economy of Lagos, is bigger than the economy of about 80% of other African countries. So if you rank countries with largest economy, Lagos will come up at about 6th or 7th. So and for good reason. The population, the location, seaport. So the maritime gateway, the population of Lagos, the commercial orientation of Lagos, and all that join together to make Lagos a desirable investment destination.
Okay.
Now, but that doesn't mean that other states are not desirable. The problem is that while certain states are endowed by their historical antecedent, so how the city has developed, or by their natural resource endowment, they have a good investment. They present good investment potentials. Now, there are other states that all they need to do is to do just a little work. Just a little work, because they have enormous resources that could form the subject of investor interest. So other natural resources, whether hydrocarbon, that's crude oil and the associated,
or even tourist centers.
Yes, tourism. So, for example, you talked about Bayelsa. If you look at the investment in Bayelsa, it will predominantly be related to the crude oil industry, or maybe some tourism and agriculture. if you look at the north central, to the northwest, to the northeast, there are a lot of there's enormous potential for agriculture, for tourism, for solid minerals, mining and solid minerals. There is for agriculture, not just crop production, but also animal husbandry and a lot of tourism attractions and all that. Now, but for you to have these things translate into investment interest, you have to provide the right environment. We have, and that's why if you want to address the economic problem of Nigeria, you have to start from the political structure of Nigeria, because that's what the experts will call the political economy. It's a skewed political economy that presents little incentive for subnationals, to look inward and to work hard and to tap the resources or the opportunities available for them. Why? Because they are guaranteed of a certain amount of money at the end of the month from the federal account, federal account.
Okay.
So it will take an exceptional governor, to say, well, we know we're getting the fact, but we need to do much more. We need to take advantage of the resources and opportunities we have in our domestic economy. And there are very few governors in Nigeria who are doing that today, And then the whole thing has now been complicated with the security situation.
Okay, so now because you talked about insecurity, yes, we know that there are some states that you should just be expecting them to be doing very good, especially some states in the southeast, but then they're not doing so well. So now, since you talked about insecurity, now for states in Nigeria, okay, let's use Nigeria generally, since you're battling with insecurity and insurgency and the snowballing effect. So now, would you actually advise a prospective investor to invest, and where?
Well, I don't even think my advice is important or necessary, in this context. But I'll just say this, and I like to go back to the Southeast you talked about, because it's a very pathetic situation we have in the Southeast at the moment, and you can't, sometimes you want to just pinpoint this and take it from there, but it's more complex than there's some kind of insurgency brewing and all that. It has historical antecedent, how we got to the point where we got into. And my humble opinion is that we got into where we are, just like every other security situation in Nigeria, because the federal government didn't do what they ought to do at the time they were supposed to do it. Because we saw when these things were just brewing. Whether you're talking about the Northeast, North Central, and the banditry, or you're talking about Southeast, And it requires some level of political dexterity, to solve the problems, because the problems were couched in political terms, but they also had the economic underpinning. And those economic underpinning was because there were a lot of young people who are not employed, and who are looking for things to do. And then somebody couches their frustration, into some kind of movement, and then they follow after the process. So either movement to make money, as the bandits are doing, or movement to impose a religious ideology, as the Boko Haram people are doing, or movement to fight for self-determination, as we see, in the Southeast, So where there is, someone says, it is error that breeds terror in governance, So where there is error in governance, you see terror surfacing in places, and once terror surfaces, investment runs away. Investment runs. You don't find investment in conflict situations. The kind of investment you find in conflict situations are hot money, and once they come in, they are ready to leave at every point in time, and they don't care so much about that environment. So we've lost investment, either medigree or the chart. For example, in the Southeast, there are many people. Southeast survives predominantly on trade, commerce. So people come from all parts of Nigeria and West Africa up to Central Africa to buy things from Onitsha, for example, or from Navy. Those people won't come because of the security situation. Southeast also survives on remittances. So people who, whether you're in Abuja, in Lagos, in US, in UK, you want to go build house in your village, you want to go do some investment in your village, most people don't want to do that now because your security is not guaranteed. So insecurity generally doesn't augur well
all right
for any region or for any state.
Wow. All right. So now let's take one sector of the economy as the manufacturing sector. Recently, Nigeria's manufacturing sector recorded a humongous amount of project that's about 10.5 billion US dollars. So now, are we even prepared to grab all of the benefits that AFCFTA has to bring? With all of these benefits, are we ready with looking at from that sector, starting from that sector?
So I'll take you back to the beginning of this interview. I talked about your trade policy being, first of all, a product of your domestic competitiveness, preparedness. So whether you're trading within ECOWAS, you're trading in AFCFT, you're trading globally, it's what you have domestically that will allow you to. So in manufacturing, we know multitude of challenges facing the manufacturing sector in Nigeria. So whether it's power, whether it is regulatory issues,
diesel supply chain.
Yes, so the cost of production is considerably high because the manufacturers will have to rely on either diesel, that the price is certain, or they will have to rely on gas, that sometimes, pricing again become an issue, and of course the public power supply is about reliable. Now, if you don't address these binding constraints to competitiveness, what you have is a situation where a manufacturer in Nigeria produces, say, milk, at 50 naira per tin of liquid milk, and the manufacturer in Ghana produces that same milk at 30 naira or 20 naira. Who do you think would sell? So the manufacturer in Ghana could actually transport that milk to Nigeria and still sell it below 50 naira. Meanwhile, the person who has produced in Nigeria is already at a disadvantage, then he can't even think of taking it to Ghana, because by the time he gets to Ghana, it will be about 17 naira. So you see, those binding constraints, are also issues relating to transportation logistics, trade facilitation, issues relating to port access to the port, time it takes to clear the goods, and other. So these are things about port congestion that happens once in a while, which hopefully will find a permanent solution to now. Hopefully it doesn't come up again, Now, these things contribute to the cost of production of a manufacturer. If you import your raw materials, and your raw materials spend 2 months at a port, and the one you have in your warehouse gets finished, how do you then keep producing? How do you then, and that's not just the cost, this is just the delay. Then when you now add the cost occasioned by that delay, So what you have is that if you don't address these binding constraints, whether it is trade facilitation constraints relating to import and export at the port, or things relating to other domestic regulations, things relating to power, internal infrastructure for transportation and movement of goods, if you don't address them, your cost of production as a manufacturer, the cost of production of our manufacturers will always be higher than what you have in our trade in for manufacturers in our trading partners. And once we are not producing competitively, those guys will even sell cheaper in our market. That's why people go to China, import things, and sell them cheaper in Nigeria than those manufactured in Nigeria. Competitiveness.
All right.
You need to reduce the cost of production by addressing the binding constraints.
Now, since you talked about competitiveness, so how can we actually create a healthy, competitive business environment with these surging cases of insecurity? You have tax incentives, you have even multiple tax springing up. The other time they were talking about tax for youth corpers, and then you have so many tax there, here and there. Businesses have to look for their own electricity. You talk about fuel hike or scarcity, diesel supply chain, all of these problems, and then all of this actually affects even the smallest business, the barber shop, the one making hair and all of that. So how do we even create, if we keep talking about ease of doing business, because I know you were a special assistant to Igbo State.
Yes, I was senior special assistant.
On ease of doing business. So how do we create, if we keep advising, clamoring for ease of doing business, how do we help that smallest shop to the large conglomerate?
Well, like you said, creating a competitive economy is not a one-day work. It takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of commitment to do that. But I think the first place is commitment, really.
Okay.
Because what we have here is that in terms of thinking, you can outsource thinking. So you can get, for example, consultants, experts, to design processes for you, design policies, design legislation for you, But do you then, as a government, have the will, the commitment to implement those things to the letter? That's what we've lacked mostly, So we know what the problems are. In fact, you just reeled out the problems. Everybody knows what the problems are. We know the problems around taxation. We know the problems around power. We know the problems around insecurity. We know them. How then do we address them? I think the missing link for me is that commitment. Is we have, and again, it goes back to the political economy. When you have a political economy that doesn't rely, that doesn't rest on productivity, but rest on patronage and rent seeking, then you can't do the kind of reforms we need to do. So, for example, if the government relies solely on the productivity of MSMEs, to derive its revenue, the government will do everything to make sure that the MSMEs are productive. Do you understand this? It's simple, but so long as we keep getting the bulk of our public revenue from outside the core drivers of our GDP. Have you seen that figure? It will amaze you. So we get the bulk of our revenue from oil, from the oil and gas industry. So whether the upstream productions, extraction and all that, or the taxes they pay in terms of companies' income tax and petroleum income tax and all that, Now but if you come to the composition of our GDP, the oil and gas industry is just about between 8 and 10%. So that tells you that it is detached from the mainstay. For example, agriculture, telecoms now has come up, trade and all that. We should pay more attention to making it easy for businesses to thrive. The solutions are there. I can't even begin to. There's nothing new per se you can manufacture in that sense. Most solutions are there. Whether you need to do automation, the places you need to do automation, move people who raise tolls, who use their offices and position as tolls to make money from people instead of doing the work they ought to do. Take them away from the system. There are a whole lot of things you could do. But until we have a government that has a singular focus on improving the business environment in Nigeria, we just keep having this conversation every year.
All right, very quickly, even as our time is beginning to run out. So now let's talk about consumer protection. We have the Federal Consumer Protection Act. And then yet, Barrister Leonard, the streets are not smiling. Yeah. The market is not smiling. And then you have people paying more for less quality and quantity. And then they keep asking, do we still have that commission, FCC there?
FCCPC, yeah.
Do we still have them? Are they even still doing anything at all?
Okay, interestingly, so the consumer protection environment or scene in Nigeria has been pathetic, and it's not limited to Nigeria. I think it's a global problem. It's a global problem because there is asymmetry of power between the manufacturer and the consumer. So the manufacturer is usually the big boy. The consumer is usually the underdog. But what then happens is that governments mediate this relationship between the business and the consumer. The business has money, is more organized, has political influence. The consumer is not organized, doesn't have much resources to fight for his or her right. So to ensure that the consumer is protected, that's why you have consumer protection. So government mediates this relationship. And now, what you have in Nigeria is, of course, we moved from the era of just having the Consumer Protection Council to having the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, and that's very important, because we've added the competition element to it. What I would say is that the problem is enormous, but I can assure you that FCCPC is doing a lot of work.
Okay.
They are. But it will probably take the next few years, probably up to 5 years, for the market to begin to respond to the work they are doing. Because what they do now, like when you see them on TV, they've gone to make a search here, they've shut this down, they've sued this person to court and all that. Other businesses begin to take cue and take dressing from what is happening and realize that, if I behave anyhow, these guys are going to come after me. So they are doing a lot of that now.
So how about the Standard Organization of Nigeria?
SON too, and again, I don't even think we can even get into that, the relationship between the different consumer protection or quality assurance institutions, whether SON, NAFDAC, and all that. They all have their remits with some overlaps here and there. So that also means that they all need to work together, towards actualizing the mandate. And I must commend FCCPC because the current executive vice chairman, CEO, Tunde has, in my opinion, done a lot of work in ensuring coordination among the various government agencies, whether it's SON, NAFDAC. Recently they are working on the airline industry with NCAA. They worked on telecom with SCC. They worked on power with NEC, NERC, and all that. That's what you need. So you need coordination among these government agencies to protect the interests of the consumer better. But again, at the base of consumer protection, is awareness, education. So you have peculiar consumer protection issues in a society that is not predominantly educated. Yes, so the level of consumer awareness is directly tied to the general level of literacy in an environment. So people who can't read, people who don't know how to assert their rights, who don't know what their rights are, who don't know how to protect it. And for you to effectively promote the right of the consumers, you need to have active consumers. So these are the things we need to build over time. Build active consumers, consumer education, take consumer education up to the primary, secondary school level, let people understand what their rights are, how the laws protect them. Like someone went to court in Enugu recently. Well, he's a lawyer, because a transport company refused to refund 500 naira he paid for a bus fare, where he said, well, you guys are delaying, I'm no longer going, you couldn't refund my money. They said no refund after payment. He sued them to court, and he got damages to the tune of 500,000 naira from the transport company. That's because he's a lawyer, he knows his right. He basically relied on the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Act, that guarantees that you cannot tell me that there's no refund after.
All right. Okay. All right, then our time is fast spent. But very quickly, one question just keep popping into my head right now. Do you have any intentions for politics anytime soon? And what position? I knew that was going to make you laugh.
Well, I've been in and out of political corridors. Served in the National Assembly as a senior legislative aide, in Imo State as a senior special assistant, and now I'm actually looking forward to playing a prominent role at the federal level. I have shied away from that over the years deliberately for personal reasons, but I think in the coming months, so I entered an election season.
You're already in an election season?
Oh yeah, so I have my candidate. Okay. I hope to play, I'm gearing up to play a major role, in the campaigns and in the elections. And and I think by 2023, I should be ready to serve. I'm not going to contest any election, but I should be ready to serve in some capacity at the federal level.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for your time with us, Barrister Leonard Ugbajah. It's been a wonderful time having this talk with you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's always my pleasure talking about these issues. If only the talk could bring the change we are looking for.
Definitely. All right then, viewers, that's all we can take for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sure that you must have been rightly educated, informed, and entertained. I've been talking to Barrister Leonard Ugbajah, who is the Executive Director, Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy. It's been a wonderful time here on The Conversation. I will definitely see you next time. From the nation's capital, Abuja, I am Annabelle Oji. God bless Nigeria.